Death at Rottingdean, Chapter 13. The smugglers used her dusty loft, dozed there through the day, or waited signals from the sea to bring moonshine away. Now owlets roost in her cupola, and pigeons peck her stones, but the corn she ground, has passed into our bones. R. Thurston Hopkins, Rottingdean Mill. Kate slept fitfully and wakened the minute Charles stumbled into the room and began taking off his clothes. The hands of the clock stood at 5 minutes to 1. "The boy found you?" she asked, getting up to light the gas lamp on the wall beside the bed. "You've seen the poor man in the mill?" "Yes," Charles said wearily, stepping out of his trousers. "Patrick found us at Arthur Sassoon's, and yes, I've seen the body at the insistence of royalty." "Of royalty? You can't mean—" "Yes," Charles was grim. "I'm afraid I do mean. His Royal Highness has taken it as a personal affront that 2 of the Queen's Coast Guard have been murdered, under the royal nose, as it were, and I've been assigned to investigate the matter, and Sir Robert Pinkney, the Brighton Chief Constable, is to assist." He took off his collar and unbuttoned his shirt. "I'm so sorry, Kate. I hope this matter won't take too long and we can get back to our holiday." "It can't be helped," Kate said philosophically. "What did you discover at the mill?" "It was too dark to discover anything, and I couldn't risk disturbing the scene by poking around without sufficient light. Anyway, I was much too tired to do more than glance around the place. We had a great deal of trouble on the return from Hoe. We were lucky to have gotten back safely." She looked at him concerned. "Trouble?" He drew back the blankets and climbed into bed. "I'll tell you about it in the morning," he said, with a muffled voice. "Let's go to sleep, shall we? There's much to do tomorrow, and I'm going to need your help at the mill. I will also want you to keep an eye on the boy." "The boy." She put out the light and lay down beside him. "Do you think he is in danger?" "Patrick knows far more than he has told us so far. In fact, he may hold the key to both these murders. If you can keep him with you and befriend him, you may be able to gain his confidence." He lifted his hand to her cheek and touched it tenderly. "I hope it's not too difficult for you, my dear." He was thinking, she knew, that it might be trying for her to be with the boy. She thought for a long moment before she answered, wanting to tell him that she mourned the loss of their infant for his sake, not for her own. That she could go through life in great contentment as long as they were together, never mind having children. And that if the deepest, most secret, most wretched of truth be told, it was that she was sure she would not have been a good mother by the standards that he held. She did not believe in the English way of raising children, confining them with their nanny to the nursery until they were old enough to have a governess or to be sent off to school. She would have felt it necessary to have her children always with her, which meant that she could not so easily travel with Charles and do the other things that she hoped to do, and that she might have come to resent the child. But while she chose the careful words, she needed to tell Charles what was in her heart. His breathing slowed and became more regular, and he began to snore. After a moment, she put her hand and let it rest on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body under the cambric fabric of his nightshirt. Somehow soon the words would have to be said, or they would always hang in the air between them. Patrick was grainy-eyed when he arose the next morning, for he had not gotten a great deal of sleep. The return journey from Hove in Lord Sheridan's motor car had held a great many excitements, not the least of which had been the 3 tires that had gone flat, one after the other, before they passed Kemp Town and the French Convalescent Hospital. His lordship carried a supply of compressed air, but it was quickly exhausted, and Patrick had earned several extra shillings for reinflating the tires with the awkward hand pump. Then both headlamps had failed just as they reached the road to Orwingdean, due, as his lordship explained, to the dampness that had partially spoiled the carbide that fueled them. But the headlamps wouldn't have been much use anyway, Patrick reminded himself, for a dense fog had blown in off of the channel and quickly had become so thick that it was impossible to see any distance ahead. At last, Lord Sheridan had directed him to get out and walk 10 paces in front, carrying a lantern, while the motor car crawled along behind. Away to the right, as the sea muttered and chuckled among the rocks at the foot of the cliff. Picking his way, Patrick had thought unhappily of the stories he had heard of the Coast Guards lured off the cliff's edge by smugglers who had moved the white rocks that were supposed to mark the road, and tales of carriages that had lost their way, horses and passengers tumbling to a dreadful death. He made sure of every foot in their journey. Delayed as they were by these difficulties, they had not reached Beacon Hill and the old windmill until just before midnight. Mr. Kipling and Lord Sheridan had talked brief with the man they'd encountered there, his lordship's servant he had proved to be, whom Lady Sheridan had apparently dispatched to guard the place. Then his lordship and Mr. Kipling had gone inside with the lantern, come out again in a few minutes, as grim-faced as Patrick himself must have been when he looked upon Captain Smith dead as a stone, and with a hole in his chest. "There's nothing more we can do tonight," Lord Sheridan said wearily. "Whatever it is to be learned will have to wait until morning. Lawrence, you will stay here and turn away anyone who might come." He put his hand on Patrick's shoulder, and his voice softened. "And you must go home, lad. Your mother will be very anxious. Shall I come with you and make some explanation?" "Mrs. Higgs only looks out for me, sir," Patrick said. He grinned wryly. "Anyway, she went to the Black Horse and won't miss me. I'll be glad to stay here," he added, eager for more adventure. Mr. Kipling shook his head. "Straight home with you now, Paddy," he said firmly, "and not a word to Mrs. Higgs about what's happened." "Before you go," Lord Sheridan said, fixing him with those piercing brown eyes, "I wonder if you would like to tell us what you know about this killing, or about the death of the other Coast Guard." He had spoken almost conversationally, and now paused as if to give Patrick time to think about what he had said. "It will help us, you know, a very great deal." Patrick pressed his lips together and shook his head numbly. "Very well, then," his lordship said, sounding disappointed. "You must promise not to speak of this matter to anyone, not of this man's death, not of the prince's interest, not of anything that has happened tonight." He paused, stern but not unkindly. "If you cannot take us into your confidence, can we at least trust you to be silent, Patrick?" Patrick chewed his lower lip, thinking of all he owed Mr. Totwell, and feeling that by swearing himself to silence he was casting his lot for these two outsiders, and against the man who had been to him what his father had not. But there was Captain Smith with a bloody bullet in his jacket, and the other dead Coast Guard, and two young children orphaned, and a wife left without a husband. "Yes, sir," he said, looking down. "Thank you, Patrick." Lord Sheridan replied with grave courtesy. "I shall be here at sunrise tomorrow morning. I could use your help, if you are not afraid to be near a dead man, and if the hour is not too early for you." "It's not too early," Patrick said. "I shall depend upon you then," his lordship said, and shook his hand as if he were a man. "Sleep well, Patrick, and thank you for your good work tonight." But for all his exhaustion, Patrick had not gotten to sleep as soon as he had liked. He had just slipped into bed when Mrs. Higgs, definitely in her cups, returned home from the Black Horse in company of Mrs. Portney. They made a pot of tea and sat down at the kitchen table and talked more loudly than they might have done if they had held the conversation sober. The first few words drew Patrick from his bed and down the narrow stairs. Out of sight, he listened intently until he heard Mrs. Portney's chair scrape back and the door close behind her. But before she left, he learned most of what had transpired at the Black Horse. The important part, anyway. It troubled him so deeply that he could scarcely sleep. When he did, he dreamed of Captain Smith, cheeks as white as alabaster, and eyes like huge glass marbles, who seemed to glower at him out of the darkness of the corner. When he pulled the blankets over his head and turned to the wall, he saw in his mind's eye George Radford's dead face and the bloody stain in the front of his jersey. He dreamed of meeting Harry Totwell and a crew of fierce-faced villagers in a tunnel that ran under High Street. When he turned and fled the other way, he ran straight into the clutches of an unholy creature in a cloak that rustled like bat wings. He woke, sweating and shivering, and lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling. But dawn, a pale grey dawn, came at last. Still troubled, Patrick dressed and stole down to the cold, silent kitchen. Mrs. Higgs was asleep with her head on the kitchen table, her mouth open, snoring loudly. He snatched a piece of bread and washed it down with a cup of cold tea, then climbed the hill to the windmill. The grass was covered with sparkling beads of dew, and the damp soaked the legs of his trousers. 100 yards behind him, most of the village still slept in the cottages and the houses nestled in the fold of great green downs. And to the south, the channel brooded in the mist which hid the southern horizon. Lord Sheridan was already there, unpacking a large camera and other sorts of photographic paraphernalia. Lady Sheridan was with him, looking very pretty in a tweed suit, the exact shade of her wind-blown auburn hair. She smiled at Patrick. "His lordship tells me that he was very glad of your decision to go to Hove to fetch him," she said. Her mouth quirked and her grey eyes twinkled. She leaned forward and spoke in a whisper, as for his ears alone. "Sometimes, but just sometimes, mind, it pays to do what you think is right, rather than what you're told to do." Patrick felt the warm flush rising in his face. Thank you, my lady," he said shyly. He looked around. "Where's Mr. Kipling? I thought he would be here." "He sent a note saying that both Mrs. Kipling and the new baby are seriously ill with colds, and he's needed at home," Lady Sheridan said. "I have deputized her ladyship to help me with the camera," Lord Sheridan said, "and you are here to be my investigative assistant." Lady Sheridan put her hand on his shoulder. "If you don't feel quite comfortable going inside," she whispered, you must say so." "It's all right, really," Patrick said, standing up as tall as he could. "I've already seen him, and that was the big shock." He looked at her. "But shan't you be afraid?" His experience of ladies was quite limited, but yet that most were delicate and would certainly faint at the sight of a corpse. "To tell the truth," Lady Sheridan admitted candidly, "I am a little nervous." She smiled at him, and he thought once again how pretty she was. "But you and his lordship will be with me, so I shall be quite brave." Patrick smiled. He liked this lady, although her firm mouth and sharp eyes somewhat belied her soft voice, and he suspected that she was only pretending to be nervous. "Shall we begin?" Lord Sheridan said in a businesslike tone. "I intend to first photograph the scene, and then we three shall do a thorough search of the interior of the mill. We need to be finished before Sir Robert Pinkney and his officers arrive from Brighton, and the villagers become aware that something is going on. Kate, you can help me set up the camera." He handed Patrick an alcohol lamp. "You shall manage the flash lamp while I take the photographs, Patrick. This is how you light it." He showed him how to do it. "What about the footprints the killer might have left on the dirt floor?" her ladyship asked, frowning. "Won't we disturb them?" Patrick gave Lady Sheridan a respectful look. Of course, footprints. He should have thought of that earlier. "I'm afraid I've already marked up any there might be," he said apologetically. "I'm sure I did a good bit of scuffing around when I was looking at him." Lord Sheridan nodded. "I've already had a look around, and there appear to be no distinctive prints, but we must exercise care. Walk lightly, and don't scuffle. Come now, let's get started." A few moments later, Patrick was standing not far from the rigid body of Captain Smith, holding the lamp in his hand. His lordship was stationed a few feet away, under the hood of a large camera set up on a wooden tripod, not very different from the camera used by the beach photographer to take pictures of the day trippers who wanted to show their friends that they had visited the seashore. But that photographer worked with a painted scene, a lady and a gentleman in a bathing dress, and holes to put a fence through, and the sea for a backdrop. Here there was only a dead body in the dark mill, and Patrick could not imagine why his lordship should want photographs of such a grisly scene. Lord Sheridan adjusted something on the camera. "Now then, Patrick," he said in a muffled voice, "let there be some light." Patrick struck a match against the stone wall and lit the alcohol flame of the strange-looking lamp, then squeezed the rubber ball as he had been instructed. A puff of magnesium powder flew into the flame. For an instant the shadowy interior of the old windmill was illuminated by a blinding white light, brighter than any Patrick had ever seen, and the pallid face of Captain Smith seemed to leap at him out of the darkness. "Very good, my lad," Lord Sheridan said, and repositioned his camera. "Now, shall we do it again?" His lordship took a dozen photographs, handing each exposed plate to her ladyship to be stowed in a leather bag. A dozen times Patrick flashed the magnesium lamp, each time turning his head to avoid seeing the awful glare of white light, like the light of the resurrection on the dead man's face. With the last flash, a reflection on the floor by the wall, not far from the spot where his shillings were hidden, caught Patrick's eye. It was a shiny brass cartridge casing, almost an inch long and perhaps a third of an inch in diameter. He was about to pick it up when Lady Sheridan stopped him. "There might be fingerprints," she cautioned. "Fingerprints?" Patrick asked dubiously. "Marks made by the tip of someone's finger, visible only with special inspection. It is a new means of identifying criminals." She raised her voice. "Charles, come and see what Patrick has discovered. It's a bullet." Patrick was still not quite sure what a fingerprint might be, but he knew a casing when he saw it, thanks to the hours he had spent shooting with Mr. Tutwell. "It's a casing, not a bullet," he said. "And it was not here 2 days ago when I came to—" He was about to say to put 2 shillings behind the stone, but he thought the better of it. "When I came to look at the pigeons." Patrick is correct. It is a casing. Lord Sheridan knelt and studied the shiny brass cylinder where it lay, not touching it. "But it's very odd, I must say." "What's odd about it?" Lady Sheridan asked, bending over for a closer look. "Well, for one thing," his lordship said, "the size and nature of the wound led me to assume that the coastguard was killed by a pistol." In spite of himself, Patrick's eyes were drawn to Captain Smith's bloody jacket. The hole, just above the dead man's silver watch chain, was small and neat. He'd seen birds and rabbits peppered with shotgun pellets. This was different. "But this cartridge would not fit any pistol with which I am familiar," Lord Sheridan went on. "If indeed the weapon was a pistol, it is of a very unusual type." He stood, hands on his hips, surveying the scene. "And notice the distance between the casing and the body." He took out and unfolded an ivory rule and measured it off. 8 feet 4 inches, he muttered. "Remarkable, quite remarkable." "I'm afraid I don't understand, Charles," Lady Sheridan said apologetically. "What is so remarkable about the distance?" Look here." His lordship went back to bend over Captain Smith's body. "There are powder burns on the victim's jacket," he said, pointing, "where the bullet entered. This would suggest that he was shot at very close range. A foot, no more." He cocked his head, speaking half to himself. "Why, then, is this casing here, by the wall, a full 7 feet from the point where the gun would be fired from?" "I don't see any great difficulty," her ladyship returned. "The killer likely picked up the cartridge from the point where it fell and tossed it here." But Patrick was beginning to see the direction of Lord Sheridan's observations and the logic behind them. "That's not the way it would have happened," he said excitedly. "A man using a revolver would have left the mill with the casing still in the cylinder. He would not have broken it open, ejected the cartridge, and tossed it away. And if by some chance he broke open the pistol, he would have put the spent cartridge in his pocket or let it fall where he stood." "Very observant, Patrick," his lordship exclaimed. "We shall make a great detective out of you just yet. But should we exclude a rifle as a murder weapon? Some modern rifles do have an ejection mechanism that could have tossed a cartridge casing into that distance." "I've never handled a rifle," Patrick said thoughtfully, "but my father once shot an Afghan at 300 yards with his, so it must be a very powerful weapon. Wouldn't a rifle bullet have gone right through him and hit the wall?" he said. As he said the words, he shuddered. "Bravo!" Lord Sheridan said. "Indeed it would, but it did not, for I have looked. There is no sign of an exit wound." Patrick reflected for a moment. "I don't think Captain Smith would have let anyone with a rifle get close to him." His lordship nodded. "In his line of business he would probably have developed a strong suspicions where weapons were concerned. A pistol, however, can be hidden." "Yes," Patrick said. "If Captain Smith thought the man was his friend—" He stopped. He had occasionally seen Mr. Tutwell and Harris and Captain Smith in conversation at the Black Horse or walking together on High Street. They had certainly seemed to be friends. "You say, Charles," Lady Sheridan mused, "that there is no exit wound, so the bullet remains in the victim's body?" "Yes," his lordship replied, "until the autopsy, when it will be extracted. That will give us more information about the gun that fired it. And there are several other things. Look at this." He bent over and pointed to a closely smoked cigarette butt. "One might think that Captain Smith had been sitting here for some time waiting, and there's this too." From the dusty floor close beside the dead man's thigh, he carefully picked up a small piece of green pasteboard, holding it by the corner. "It looks like a ticket," her ladyship said. "A ticket to what, I wonder?" Patrick knew the answer to that, and he felt a strange relief as he said, "It's a ticket to the bathing machines on the beach. Trunky Thomas owns them. You have to pay him before you can use one. Everybody complains that he charges too much." "Something tells me," Lord Sheridan said dryly, "that the victim would not have been in the habit of frequenting the local bathing machines." "No," Patrick said thoughtfully, "he wouldn't." Now that he thought of it, he realized that Harry Tutwell was not the only man he had seen walking and talking with the Coast Guard. Trunky Thomas knew him too, in fact. He had seen the two of them huddled together talking not long after the first Coast Guard's body had been dragged onto the beach. "Ah," Lord Sheridan said, "I think then we should have a talk with Mr. Thomas." He went back to the cartridge casing, inserted a stick in it, and placed it carefully in his handkerchief, wrapping it up. He glanced at Patrick. "You know this village, Patrick. You must have some information about what's going on here. Is there anything you can tell us about this crime?" Patrick half turned away, wondering how much his lordship knew about Rottingdean's nocturnal enterprise. All things considered, he himself didn't know very much for certain, beyond the fact that the villagers, almost all of them in fact, as far as he could tell, had been involved in digging out the old tunnels and were now engaged in the smuggling business once again. He couldn't, for example, say where the goods were coming from, or where they were going, or what besides spirits, wine, tea, tobacco, and fancy dress goods might be involved. And he certainly didn't know who had killed Captain Smith, although he had to admit to feeling grateful to whoever had dropped the ticket, for it opened the way to at least one other explanation of what had happened here. And although he had run his share of errands for Mr. Tutwell and carried his share of messages, whatever he said would be a guess, and Lord Charles was asking for information, not guesses. Besides, there was no need to tell more than was necessary at any one time, and he had already told quite a lot, so therefore he shook his head. Lord Sheridan looked disappointed, but only nodded. "Let's go over the floor carefully, then. When we are finished, we will go outside and wait for the constable from Brighton." They searched in silence for 10 minutes or so, but discovered nothing else, and when Patrick stepped into the morning light, he wasn't sure whether he should be glad or sorry. Even for someone as intelligent as his lordship, it mustn't be easy to discover who had killed a man when the only clues were a cartridge casing and a ticket to a bathing machine. It was certainly possible that the killer of Captain Smith would go forever undiscovered, but whether that would be a good thing or bad, he was not yet sure. Lady Burne-Jones and I should like to drive to Black Rock this morning, Patrick, Lady Sheridan said, interrupting his thoughts. We hope to visit the widow of the young coastguard who died earlier, but neither of us are sure of the way to the cottage. Will you go with us and point it out? Patrick was silent for a moment, thinking of Harry Todwell, to whom he owed so much, and who counted on him, and weighing out the consequences of doing this or that, and saying one thing or the other. But surely there was no difficulty in pointing out the Black Rock Coast Guard station to such a lovely lady. It's not hard to find, he said. You can't miss the white cottage and the flagpole, but I'll go with you if you like. Lady Sheridan put her hand on his shoulder once again. Very good. This morning air has made me hungry. Shall we walk down to North End House and see if there might be some breakfast waiting for us there? Patrick was glad to oblige.